Živijo, tukaj je Anže, poslušate podcast Aparatus, kjer legitimni člani družbe povejo, kaj počnejo v življenju.
Stroške gostovanja, spletne strani in vseh fajlov Aparatusa tokrat sponzorira podjetje de-sign, ki se ukvarja z industrijskim in grafičnim oblikovanjem ter oglaševanjem in je na internetu na www.de-sign.si.
Tole pa je 54. epizoda Aparatusa, s kateri sem govoril s Caseyom Lissom, se pravi bo že spet v angleščini. Gre za eno tretjino trojca, ki dela res odličen tehnološki podcast o Apple in ostalih zadevah, Accidental Tech Podcast. Zraven sta še Johnom Siracuso in pa Marcom Armentom. Pred Accidental Tech podcastom so posneli še eno miniserijo, ki je slišala na ime Neutral, kjer so se pogovarjali pa o avtomobilih. Jaz sem bil full fan te oddaje, tega podcasta, tako da sem začel sicer z mojim standardnim vprašanjem, pa so se pa hitro malo o avtomobilih pogovarjali, pa o Top Gearu in ostalem. To, da veste, zakaj na začetku govora, koliko je kdo velik in kdo paše v BMW-je in kdo ne. Preden se začne, pa še enkrat hvala vsem, ki ste dali oceno v Aparatusu v iTunesih, predvsem pa unim, ki ste Aparatus tudi finančno podprli. To lahko naredite na aparatus.si/podpri, s tem podprete vse oddaje, ki so na Aparatusu, ker tako lahko kupimo kakšno opremo oziroma ki pomaga pri računalnikih. Vsak evro je dobrodošel, tako da če lahko aparatus.si/podpri. Evo, zdaj pa Casey.
Yeah, we're gonna start soon, I guess. I don't really have like a jingle or anything. I basically have the same first question for all my guests, and that's who are you and what do you do?
Sure. So I'm Casey Liss, and you would probably know me as one of the three hosts of the Accidental Tech Podcast, which I do with a couple friends of mine, Marcom Armentom and Johnom Siracuso. I also did a show with them about cars, a mini-series called Neutral, and that went on earlier this year. We're recording in the end of 2013. And then during the day, I'm just a regular corporate stooge working at a small consulting company in Richmond, Virginia, which is about 2 hours south by car of Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay. It's all south of Washington then. Because I'm going to ask you about Virginia later. I have this touristy segment. Where,
that sounds good.
Yeah, so we'll get to that. But okay, so I guess we should start with the podcasts.
Sure.
Because that's how I found out about you. But so the Neutral miniseries. Mm-hmm. So, okay, before we go into that podcast, which I thought was great, because
thank you.
We'll go into that, yeah. But how tall are you? This is going to sound weird. Just bear with me here.
I am somewhere between 5'11" and 6 foot, and I don't know what that is in meters. I guess a little shy of 2 meters, something like that.
Well, yeah,
right?
6 feet is, I think that's like 1.80 meters. I think, because a foot's 30 centimeters, right?
A foot is 12. Oh, in centimeters, I don't know how many it is. So I am 1.8 meters, thanks to Google.
Okay, yeah. So that's not really that tall. Okay. That's...
I'm a heck of a lot taller than Marco, thank you very much. But I am no Johnom Siracuso.
How tall is he then?
I believe he's 6'2", so, you know.
But that's still not tall. Okay, so I thought, because
what are you, 7 feet?
Well, almost. I'm 6'8".
Are you really? Holy
yeah, no, I'm not joking.
Yeah, I'm not very tall then. Just kidding.
Yeah, no, because you guys always talk about like you and John being kind of tall, but I guess like then Marco's really, really short. Or
well,
like...
with respect to my dear friend Marco, he is not a tall man. He is, I want to say he's somewhere around 5'6" or 5'8". So if 6'2" is about 1.87 meters, then that makes 5'6", meter and a half, a little over a meter and a half.
Oh, okay. That makes a lot more sense now. Okay, so let me explain why I asked that, because this is weird.
Hey, I was going with it.
Yeah, but the reason the reason I ask is because you guys, well, you like BMWs, basically, and you own a 3 Series, right?
That's right.
Okay, so but if you're just 1.80 meters, then I guess you fit in there.
Oh yeah,
because every 3 Series I've sat in, I've basically my knees pretty much wouldn't fit into the car. So how do you find but I'll ask you, when you drive it, I guess it's fine, but the passenger seat?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that I've had in the car, I'm trying to think. I have a friend who's 6'6", so that's, just barely shy of 2 meters, or maybe around 2 meters. And he's never driven my car, and for the life of me, I can't recall if he's been in the front. Certainly, if you're more than 6 foot, 6'2", I think it would be a little bit of a squeeze. I'm also trying to remember if I don't believe I have my seat all the way back, so I think I could come back further. What I'll have to do is, if I'm ever around Johnom Siracuso with my car, I'll have to throw him in and take a picture for you, which actually is, I'm supposed to be seeing him sometime next week and we'll be driving up there. So in principle, in a week or so, I can get you a picture of John either shoehorning himself into my car or sitting comfortably. We'll see.
Okay, that was my one fan question of neutral, because I had to ask that, because you sort of, because you guys know how tall each other, like everybody is.
Right.
You just say tall and short and stuff, and I never knew. So right. I'm just sitting there thinking, man, how tall, because everybody just says Siracuso is really, really tall, and I guess he is,
Well, yes, but, for our group, he's very tall. So you're like Craig Hockenberry, who is Chalkenberry on Twitter. He's like 6'8" or something like that. And so whenever you're at WWDC, if you ever want to know where Chalk is, you just look up, and he's the only head that's standing above everybody else. And, it's kind of like the Empire State Building in Manhattan. You just have to look up, and that'll point you in the right direction.
Yeah, that's how we are used, basically, when we go out. We'll meet at you.
Exactly.
That's basically how it works.
Yeah, that's right.
So the question I wanted to ask you about neutral, because you guys actually planned it from the start to be a mini-series, which I guess it's what we're calling it now, because there weren't that many podcasts doing that before that, at least in the tech world, or I'm not aware of them. So how much of a conscious decision was that from the get-go?
It was very conscious. So the history of it is that Marco and John both had wildly successful podcasts on their own, both on the 5x5 network. John did Hypercritical, which is arguably, maybe not even arguably, the best tech podcast that's ever been. And,
I'll agree with that.
and I think Marco would as well. And Marco had Build and Analyze, which I also adored. And so they had both, this was around a year ago, almost exactly. They had both decided to stop doing their tech podcasts. And at around the time that Marco was starting to wind down Build and Analyze, I had started pestering him about, hey, we should do a car show, you and me. We should do a car show. We should do a car show. And after a while, he started to be like, you know what? We should do a car show. And so we got to talking about it, and we decided we didn't think that we had enough material to do a long-running series. And unlike ATP, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, we never wanted Neutral to be about, what car just came out, what has the most horsepower. We wanted it to be very casual, and that's actually what we called it, a casual car podcast. And so around the time that we were really getting serious about trying to figure out how to make Neutral work, we found out that John was also deciding to stop Hypercritical. And so Marco said to me, hey, you know what? I wonder if John would get involved in this, because he really, really, really likes cars too. And so he asked John, and John said, yeah, that sounds good. And we all agreed that since the two of them had just come off these very long-running podcasts, I think each of them went about 2 years or something like that, that we decided, let's just do it for like 8 episodes, and we'll see after 8 where we are. And this way, John won't get burnt out, Marco won't get burnt out, and we know up front that we don't have enough material to really last forever. And so that's what we decided to do. And come episode 8, we still had a few more left in us, and it ended up that Marco and his wife Tiff and myself and my wife Erin ended up going on this trip to Germany to pick up Marco's new BMW. And we thought, why don't we use that episode, the recap of the Germany trip, as the final episode. So the whole arc of Neutral was kind of Marco deciding what car to buy, and then going ahead and placing the order, and then the 4 of us going and getting it and picking it up. And so it was a very nice arc. So it was 12 episodes in all. And then 2 months ago, Marco and friend of the show _David Smith and myself all decided to go to BMW Performance Driving School down in South Carolina, which is about a 6 or 7 hour car ride from where I am. And so we figured, let's just do a Neutral special. So we had John, Marco, myself, and Dave, and we all did a Neutral special. I guess we actually didn't release it until about a month ago, but we did a special about the BMW driving school experience. And, we've kicked around the idea. Maybe we'll do a season 2, maybe not. To be honest, I don't think we will. ATP takes up quite a bit of time, but we'll see what happens. I really enjoyed Neutral. It's very kind of you to say that you liked it. You and I might be the only ones. No,
yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, it was funny being at WWDC because at WWDC, which was in June, that's when, all the Apple nerds get together in San Francisco. And ATP was a thing at that point. And it was starting to get popular. And we would see people in the halls and they would say, "Oh, hey, you're Casey. I love ATP. Neutral's okay."
Yeah, but I think that's because I don't know what the Venn diagram of
absolutely
WWDC goers and people who really like cars is. Right. I don't know. The cross section must be pretty tiny, I guess.
Yeah, and all kidding aside, it was a lot of fun. John and Marco and I really enjoyed doing it, and it led to ATP, which obviously we really enjoy. So I don't think any of us regret it. I think we're very glad we did it. But it certainly didn't have the legs that ATP had. And so that's why we decided, we'll be done after 12 episodes plus one special.
Yeah, but I actually enjoyed it just because of the casual part of it. Because you guys never really pretended, to be it wasn't hypercritical for cars.
No, and I think that's what upset a lot of people, all kidding aside, is that, here it was, they're used to John, who was Mr. Preparation. I mean, he spent hours preparing for Hypercritical, getting his notes straight, fact-checking everything. They were almost, I would say, these are my words, not his, they were almost like mini OS X reviews. He would really spend a lot of time on it. And so when he was willing to just kind of talk off the cuff, and all of us got facts wrong constantly. And if you look at the iTunes reviews, some of them are, this is really fun. It's great to see guys that are casually interested in cars like me. And then you'll see a lot that are, oh my God, they got this wrong and they got that wrong and they got this wrong and they got that wrong. And I can't listen to this.
Which is, I don't, we'll get to the whole, listener reaction stuff, because you had this great segment in the second to last ATP where you talked about how you guys deal with feedback and stuff. Mm-hmm. But we'll get to that. I want to talk about cars a little more because so at one point during Neutral, you guys basically said you're going to be compared to the Top Gear trio. Basically, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how big is the British version of Top Gear over there? Because
it's a tough question to answer because I would tell you it's relatively popular, but I hang out with people that are kind of like-minded. So a lot of my friends also like cars. A lot of my friends also like Top Gear. But I will say that I don't remember how this came to be, but I was at my eye doctor, my optometrist, and I was going for a checkup. And the receptionist, somehow or another, maybe I was wearing the jacket we got at BMW driving school, so it had, an M logo and BMW driving school written on it. And I guess maybe she asked me about that, and so that somehow led to a discussion about Top Gear. And this was one of the receptionists at the eye doctor. So it was a young lady. This was a person who, if I just looked at her, she didn't strike me as someone who would be a car nut, and she clearly adored Top Gear. And my wife, for example, not the biggest car nut. I mean, she loves her car, but, not a big car fiend, and she really enjoys Top Gear. So it's hard to say. I would say it's relatively popular, but there's different levels of enthusiasm. So, I'll make sure that I get the episode when it's released as soon as possible by, whatever means necessary. I will acquire a copy. And actually, in the summertime, what we do is when the series for the summer comes out, what we'll do is we'll take what we call a king-size sheet, which is basically a big, large sheet that you would put on your bed, and we drape it off the back of our house. And when the sun sets, we'll actually get a projector, because a friend of mine has a projector, and we'll project the first episode of the summer series onto this sheet that's hanging off the back of our house. So it's kind of like an outdoor movie theater. And so we have a bunch of our friends over, and we have a couple drinks and have a cookout and, make burgers and hot dogs and whatnot. And we'll celebrate the return of Top Gear. So I take it, my family, Aaron and I, my wife and I, we take it really seriously. And, certainly a lot of our friends have come to expect and enjoy the Top Gear party every year. But in general, I mean, I think some Americans like it, some don't.
Yeah, because I never got it, because it's not on BBC America over there, right? I mean,
it is.
But it's like it comes like 2 years after, like it's not current, or there's some.
That's the way it used to be. Now this past series, it was delayed by maybe a week, so really it wasn't bad. Now what I didn't pay close attention to was whether or not they edited the show, because on the BBC, I guess the way it works is the Brits pay a license fee, so the BBC doesn't really have to have very much advertising, whereas in America, almost all TV, with the exception of like HBO and things like that, almost all TV is advertising sponsored, and so you'll have commercials. And what that means is, for an hour-long TV show in America, only about 42 minutes of that is actual content. The other, 18 minutes is advertisements that's dispersed throughout the show. And so what the BBC America used to do in the past, I'm not sure if they're still doing this, is they would cut segments of the Top Gear episodes in order to squeeze this 60-minute show into just 42 or whatever it is, 42 minutes. And so you would lose some of it. And the other odd thing was the music licensing apparently is different. And so what you'll find is the music that they use, the background music they use in segments is different between the UK versions and the UK version that's played in America. And that sounds silly, but they have such incredible music selections and such great soundtracks. And, the cinematography is so fantastic, and that doesn't change. But even the music is very different. And that, I don't know, it just seems disingenuous, or it's not genuine, if nothing else.
Oh, okay. Because, we kind of know that, an hour of American TV is usually 42, because we basically watch most of them by means which we won't think about. But I did not know about the music thing. That's even more depressing, I think, because then it's edited down and like the background music's different. So genuine is not the word you'd use, right?
Exactly.
Because I don't know, because over here, like Top Gear is pretty popular, but like you said, like my girlfriend likes it a lot, but she couldn't care less about cars, basically. I don't know what it is about that show that sort of transcends the whole, car nut community, I think.
I would agree. It's funny because when I describe it to people who have not seen it, I say, on paper, it's a car show, but really, I would say it's a comedy show that's just themed around cars. And it's really just three guys screwing around and having fun.
Yeah, but they do get to, like, every segment they do does have a point. It's usually just one point, they don't get that much in there, but I don't know. I mean, calling it just a comedy show, I think kind of sells it short, I think. It's sort of, I don't know, they've done something that is sort of hard to replicate, I think. That's maybe why the other versions haven't really taken off, I guess.
Right.
Because there were plans for a US one, right? But that sort of fell through.
No.
There's an actual, I just haven't bothered downloading it then.
There were plans, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, to do one with which, among other people who were going to host, one of them was Adam Carolla, and I wouldn't expect that you would know who that is. But
I do know who that is, but most people don't. But I actually do, because of the podcast.
Right. Oh, okay. So he's a comedian, and he's very, very interested in cars. Similar to Jay Leno, but a little bit less famous, even over here. And so I think he would have been a really, really, really great host for Top Gear America. Well, I think it was NBC maybe that started this process. I think they filmed a pilot and then they abandoned it. And so 2 or 3 years ago, the History Channel, which is like the Discovery Channel. I'm not sure if either of those things mean anything to you, but basically
we have both.
Oh, okay. So the History Channel, they decided to create an American Top Gear. And so it's one race car driver, Tanner Faust, who has done all sorts of different race car driving. It's a commentator, well, not a commentator, I guess, a broadcaster that does NASCAR events, which is our really weird drive in circles racing that I don't really understand, but a lot of Americans love. And then, who's Adam something or other? I can't remember his name. I think it's Adam Ferrara, who is another comedian, not the one I was just talking about, a different Adam that's a comedian. And he's very, I enjoy him a lot because he's from New York and has that really New York attitude about him. And I'm sure he, makes it even worse on purpose just for the cameras, but it's enjoyable as a show as long as you don't compare it to the UK Top Gear. If you compare it to the UK Top Gear, it's absolute rubbish. But if you just take it for what it is, which is, a fun show about cars. It really isn't bad.
Okay. But yeah, that was my next question. How does it compare? So, okay, yeah, I guess you answered that one. So, I'm going to ask you, okay, this is another car question, then we'll go to ATP, I promise.
Hey, I'll do cars all night. I'm fine with that.
Like, I've been to the States once. So I was just in New York, which doesn't really count, I guess. So, well, you know what I mean. That's not really America. That's Europe with Americans, I think. But, so I never drove any cars, but like, is it true that like basically every American car is really crappily made inside? Like the interior, the plastic. No, I know that sounds like I'm joking. But
I know what you mean.
Because you actually live there and I guess you're a car guy. So I'm actually asking. That's a genuine question.
Yeah, so I think that if you were to listen to Top Gear, the UK version of Top Gear, and if you listen to what they say about American cars, I think they're right, but it's overblown. So yes, the inside is pretty crummy by comparison to Japanese or European cars. They don't handle typically as well as Japanese or European cars, but it's not that bad. And consider also that, we get the same Focus that you guys do, or certainly that the UK does. The Ford Focus ST is here. And that's odd because for a long time, Ford had really compelling, really wonderful models in the UK that we didn't get. Or if we got them, they were neutered and terrible and awful versions of what was really great in the UK. And so they're getting better. I mean, I think the Detroit crisis, from, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, where almost every car company in America almost went bankrupt. I think that sort of straightened them out, but it's hard. I've read a report recently that, they started, all the car manufacturers here started making a crud load of SUVs or, kind of big American truck-like things, which we all love for some crazy reason, but nobody else in the world can afford to drive because they use 1 million gallons of fuel to go 2 inches. And so, the reason I bring this up is because apparently they're starting to fall into their old ways of, gas isn't that expensive, or petrol. I'm not sure which term you guys use, but, petrol isn't that expensive. So let's make SUVs again. And that's kind of what got us in that mess in the first place, where nobody would buy American cars because gas got expensive, and then nobody wanted a big SUV with a 7-liter V8 that gets 14 miles a gallon. And I'm not even going to try to do that conversion to
I was about to say that. Yeah, but that's the SUVs are kind of, I don't know. They're like nobody has them here basically. You see a couple of them here and there, but like I'm talking about the American brands. I think like the most I see are like the American embassy cars. I think that's if I see like a big Chevy or some weird Ford that I've never seen, it's usually like has diplomatic license plates basically.
Right, which makes sense.
Yeah, but we do have like BMWs that are taxi cabs here, so that kind of that's usually weird. Any like American that's come here usually points that out.
That is like very, very weird because for the longest time, our taxi cabs were Ford Crown Victorias, which if you don't know what that is, but you've ever seen an American movie made in the last 15 years, it's a cop car. Yep.
Yeah, the cop car.
It's a cop car. And so that's what most of our taxi cabs were. And when we were in Munich, of course, most of them, I believe, were Mercedes, despite the fact that we were in Munich. And when I was in Greece a few years ago, my wife and I were in Greece for a wedding, and most of those taxis were Mercedes. And the other interesting thing about that was there were Mercedes that actually had a standard transmission, had a stick, which you never see in America. Pretty much every Mercedes you can possibly buy has an automatic, which is why I'll never, ever buy a Mercedes.
So, seriously, I did not know that. Okay. That's because I've tried to drive like an automatic a couple of times. I don't know. Doesn't feel like driving to me.
I agree.
Guess.
Yeah, it's more riding than it is driving.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But okay, we're done with cars now because this is okay. I don't know how to segue into ATP now, so it's just okay. The Accidental Tech Podcast, right, is now like it's you guys, and then I listen to Bionic, which I know you're a recent listener of, and then the Menu Bar, which I don't know if you've heard of it, but
I've heard of it. I've not listened to it though.
All right, so those are the 3 American podcasts that I have in my Pocket Casts playlist that downloads the episodes automatically. So ATP,
right? So you're the third guy, basically. That's because I didn't know how to ask this question, but like you said before, like John and Marco had like really, well, in the tech world, pretty big podcasts before,
sure.
right? So how was that, like, because neutral was a car thing and that's sort of different, but here you're talking about tech stuff most of the time. So how intimidating, or was it not intimidating when you started out?
Yeah, it was very intimidating. Yeah, when we first started Neutral, it was somewhat intimidating because I'd never done a podcast before. I didn't know if, 5 people, 500, 5,000, 50,000 people would listen to Neutral. And I think part of the reason that I was able to get into it and kind of get in the flow of Neutral so quickly was because the first 2 episodes of Neutral we recorded in one night. And when we started, we said, let's just start talking and we'll record our, audio, but we'll expect that we're going to throw this away and that we're not going to keep it. We're not going to release it, but let's, at least see if we can talk to each other well, if we get along on a podcasting sense. And so I didn't really think much of it. And if you listen back to the first couple of Neutrals, because I thought it was just us, I swore like a sailor. I was saying terrible, awful, words all the time. And I think because of that actually helped ease me into podcasting. Now, in terms of ATP, it was, it started accidentally. I mean, that's not a joke. The name of the show is Accidental Tech Podcast because it started accidentally. What would happen was after Neutral stopped recording, we were still recording, but we knew that the Neutral portion of the evening had ended. We'll hang on for a few minutes and just kind of talk to each other. And inevitably, if you put 3 developers in next to each other, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about tech-related things. And so the first few episodes of what became ATP were really just us kind of goofing off talking about tech stuff. And then Marco released, I believe he put them up on SoundCloud or something like that. And it started to feel to us, and we started to get some feedback from those who knew about it, that it was pretty good. And so we decided, let's let Neutral run its course, like we talked about earlier. But after that, let's make ATP a thing. And that's very intimidating because I feel like, not that I don't know about tech things, but I felt okay doing a casual car podcast. And between the 3 of us, I think I wouldn't say I know the most about cars, but I certainly don't know the least. Whereas it's very intimidating standing next to Marco and John talking about tech related things. And I am a developer by trade. I write code every day. That's what I do. I feel like I know a lot about the industry. I know I have a lot of strong opinions about things, but it is very intimidating to stand next to giants. And I don't mean that in a literal sense, of course. Well, except for John, he is pretty tall. But, when you stand next to these 2 people, it's hard not to be scared and not to wonder, do I really belong here? But I just trudge through. And if you listen to early ATPs, you'll find that I say very little. And sometimes, like we recorded last night for this week's episode, and it just so happened that I didn't have a whole lot to add to the conversation. And so I didn't talk a tremendous amount last night. And then there's other times where I do have a lot to add and I will talk a lot. But no matter what, I just kind of fell into the role of kind of being the showrunner. And not to say that I'm the boss, but oftentimes I'll kind of try to point the conversation in a certain direction or try to move us between topics because, with John and Marco, they both have tremendous amounts of things to say about pretty much everything. And so sometimes they need a little nudge in the right direction to keep the conversation flowing. And that's what I tend to find myself doing, even if I don't have a particular opinion about whatever we happen to be talking about.
Yeah, but I was actually going to comment on that because, that role sort of fits you because you basically, I sort of see it as you cutting Marco off most of the time, right? Or maybe not cutting him off, but sort of preempting him when, you basically know what he's going to say. So you just give John a chance to, kind of jump in there. But no, that's actually kind of, I have a little radio background and, that's actually sort of an important part of that show, I think. Because if it was just, 3 guys that wanted to talk, it'd get weird, I think, at that point. So it's nice to have that anchor. I think that's what Dan was on the 5x5 shows,
Yeah, absolutely.
That, so you sort of fit somewhere in there. But, okay, and the next thing I wanted to ask you, I'm going to say fame, right? And we kind of exchanged a couple of emails there. But how have you been handling that? Because people actually didn't know you now. You're just talking to a guy from Slovenia who, we're not supposed to be talking to each other. This is weird.
Right.
But, through the magic of the internet.
The magic of the internet.
Yeah. So how has that been?
It's been tremendous in the best possible way. It's been extremely humbling and extremely flattering, and I've really been very, very lucky. But it's been weird. It's been extremely weird in a good way, not in a bad way. I don't mean to be complaining, but it's odd. It's peculiar. When I was on my way to WWDC, I met up with Underscore, and because he lives right by the big airport in Washington D.C., which is what I was flying out of. And so we ended up, meeting up and going to sit in the terminal together waiting for our flight. And as I was talking to Underscore, all of a sudden I see out of the corner of my eye somebody who's sitting with his back to my back. This person turned around and kind of looked at me a little funny. And I just kept on talking to Underscore. And then he said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you Casey?" I said, "Yes." "Oh, well, I happen to recognize your voice from the podcast. I just want to tell you, I really enjoy ATP. It's a really good show." And I don't know who this gentleman was. I couldn't tell you, but he was very, very nice. And it was extremely nice of him to say something, but I must have looked like he was a ghost or something, or I had just seen an alien, because I believe that was the first time I was ever recognized in public for really any reason in my entire life, and so imagine you're sitting in the airport and somebody, a couple feet away from you says, "Hey, I know you from your voice." That's just so odd. And again, it's not a bad thing. I'm not complaining. It was wild. And it's only happened to me a handful of times outside of things like WWDC, Singleton, which I went to a few months ago. In day-to-day life, it's only happened a handful of times. But nevertheless, it's different. And, silly things have changed a lot. Like I have a whole bunch more Twitter followers than I ever had before. And that sounds like a humble brag, but I bring that up because when you ask a question to a few hundred Twitter followers, you may get crickets in response. You might get nothing back. Yeah. If you ask a question to a few thousand Twitter followers, you're going to get an answer. And in fact, you might even get more answers than you wanted. And so it's a very different, very weird, but wonderful, wonderful thing. And at first I almost felt guilty about it because I almost felt like I was riding on Marco and John's coattails. And if you think about it logically, I don't think that's the case. I mean, I was 1/3 of both shows, but nevertheless, nobody knew who I was. But I'm starting to accept the fact that, maybe I actually am okay on my own, and I'm not such a terrible guy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the right way to look at it. You're 1/3 of that show. But yeah, I see what you mean, because they they have a lot of baggage in that space, I guess, right. with the former podcasts. But okay, so I just want to talk about that whole, I think it was after the ATP episode, I guess, the After Dark show or whatever you guys call it. When you talked about the feedback, the people that actually sort of, I don't know, I guess, are mean? Is that a fair enough word to use, or?
Yeah, I would assume that this translates for you guys as well, but a lot of times we'll refer to them as trolls. So people who are just kind of maybe not mean, but certainly not nice, and oftentimes say or ask things that really aren't productive, that really don't add anything. And so after episode, I think it was 41 of ATP. Yeah. So generally speaking, if you haven't listened to the show, we'll do, an hour to an hour and a half. And then we'll play our little theme song that our friend Jonathan wrote. And then typically what we'll end up doing is we'll put some of the stuff that we talk about after we kind of, let a breath out and kind of relax a little bit. And we'll put some of that in after the theme song. And so that's what we did in this particular episode. We just happened to get talking about criticism on the internet and how, it hurts when somebody says, "Man, you're an idiot," or, if you look at the iTunes reviews in America for ATP, there's someone who will continually update their review to say in some way or another, I really wish there was an option to download ATP without Casey in it. And they edit this review constantly in order to keep it fresh and near the top. And, I see that, and that hurts. That doesn't make me feel good about me. It doesn't make me feel awesome. But, what we talked about on the show is you can't let that rule your life. You can't let that bother you, because in the end of the day, there's a bunch of people, thousands of people that do like the show and all of it. And they like me as much as they like everyone else. And so you can't let yourself get bothered by it, but it's hard, and it's funny because anyone who says, oh man, I really love the show, that's like, great. I'm excited for that. Thank you. That's really awesome. But when somebody says, I wish I had an option not to download or to download a version that doesn't have Casey in it, man, that sticks with you. It hurts. And so we got to talking about that. And it was helpful. It was cathartic. It was kind of group therapy. So we weren't sure if it was going to be well received, but it ended up that a lot of people came out of the woodwork to say that they really appreciated it. And we appreciated that. It was really nice to hear.
Yeah, because I think that was a nice phrase, came out of the woodwork. Like, the people that actually like the show are usually silent. Mm-hmm. Like, you'll get like a couple of people here and there, but like there's the silent majority that usually just, like enjoys the show, but never really says anything.
Right. And you've got to run into this yourself, because from everything I understand, your shows are very popular in your homeland. And so you've got to run into not only being recognized, I would imagine, but also, dealing with some of this criticism, and it's got it. I don't know how you feel about it, but it's hurtful.
Yeah, I don't know. It just kind of, but you see that the numbers here are so much smaller, because like Slovenia has 2 million people. That's it. That's the whole country, right? So when you have like a niche thing, like a podcast, I can I can count like the critics, like maybe, I need like 3 hands, but that's pretty much no, but I do get what you mean. But like every once in a while, I'll get like an email that's like 2 pages of just positive stuff, basically. And that sort of kind of, I guess vindicates every crappy thing you get.
Right. I
think. And that's sort of what you need to focus on. And that's why I like that discussion, because you guys said, it hurts and stuff. But I don't know. Marco said this thing that he sort of, his skin got thicker, I guess. Mm-hmm. That he's handling it a little better while he's blocking people on Twitter. But, that's a different thing. But I think that's what happens. I think maybe in a couple of years, you'll be the same way. You'll just, not be irked as much.
Yeah.
But also, I like disclaimer, I have, I think like 82 iTunes reviews. No, I think it's like more than 90. And I think I have like 2 4-star reviews, and everything else is 5 stars.
Ah,
so maybe
you're just doing a better job than we are. That's what it is.
Maybe I'm not the guy to, I'm going to get a 1-star review. I just brought it on.
Yeah, you did. You just opened the door.
But, I just wanted to say that was like my favorite 40 minutes of ATP yet. And it wasn't about tech, I guess.
Yeah, and it's funny because, well, firstly, thank you. And it's funny because, John said a couple times during the discussion, oh, nobody wants to listen to this. Nobody wants to hear about this. We're a tech podcast, and we're talking about feelings and what's that about? But yeah, to be honest, that's actually my favorite segment that we've done on ATP so far. And we've had great conversations about technical topics, but in the end of the day, technical topics, especially in this particular industry, they kind of go away. The new Mac Pro that's coming out any day now at the time we're recording this, eventually that's not going to be new anymore. And you know what? In the grand scheme of things, nobody's really going to care. But feelings, as silly as it sounds, they stick with you and they last forever. Even after ATP ends, I'm going to remember what it felt like to have random strangers on the internet tell me that I'm an idiot. I'm going to remember what it feels like to have random strangers in the real world come up to me and say, excuse me, but I really love your show. And I will remember that feeling forever. And so it's a far less ephemeral thing to talk about. And that's why I think it was a really great segment.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to go to the last part of this interview because you ended that way too nice. Man, I don't know. Anything I would have said would just be piling on, and I'm just gonna, we're gonna get teary-eyed and stuff. So, okay, we're gonna do the whole tourist portion now.
Sure.
Which is, what's it like in Richmond, Virginia? Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, just like, what's it like there, I guess.
So I can't speak for anywhere else in the world. I can't even speak for the West Coast of the United States, but on the East Coast of the United States, where I am, there's the very northeast, the extreme northeast, which is like Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire, and these places that are by and large, relatively rural. A lot of great outdoors activities, a lot of great countryside, but not a lot of population. Then you move into New England, which is, the Boston area, New York, Philadelphia, and places like that. And we would refer to that as the Northeast or New England. And that's where I would say my home is. I grew up in New York and Connecticut, not New York City, but the state of New York near the city. And Connecticut is a very, very, very small state nearish New York City. Well, it's near several things, but among other things, New York City. And so anyway, the northeastern United States, northeastern United States has a tendency to be very quick. The people there have a tendency to have kind of a reputation of being a little kind of jerks. And I'm not saying I don't think that because I grew up there, and I think it's just that as a silly example, when you're in a grocery store, supermarket, or whatever you want to call it, and you're in the Northeast, if you're in New York or Connecticut, when you're in the grocery store, there is almost no chance that you will talk to anyone except the cashier that's ringing you up when you want to leave, when you pay for your stuff. And once you cross around a little bit south of Washington, D.C. in Virginia, once you cross this kind of invisible line, you start to get into what I would call the South. And in the South, everyone is very friendly. Things move a little bit slower. And if you go to the grocery store, there's a 50-50 chance that some stranger at the grocery store is going to have some sort of brief conversation with you. Not because I'm me, just, hey, would you mind if I ask you which one of these cheeses do you like the most? I'm having trouble deciding. And that's not a bad thing. But as someone who grew up in the Northeast where you never hear any of that, everyone minds their own business and leaves everyone else alone. Being down in what's sort of kind of the South, it's very different. And what's weird about Richmond is that if you look at the state of Virginia, it's kind of in the center of Virginia. And I would tell you that the northern part of Virginia, which is where D.C. is, that's still kind of the Northeast. And the southern part of Virginia, that to me is the South, where everything is really slow. And everyone's really friendly, but everything's really slow. And Richmond is in this like center section, which has a little bit of both. It has some of the charm and the nice things, like the nice people of the South, but it moves a little quicker. It's a little faster than you would find in the very southern parts of Virginia. And what's also interesting is Richmond actually was the capital of the Confederacy during the American Civil War. So,
okay, I did not know.
So in the short version of that story is, well, depending on where you grew up, you get taught differently. As someone from the Northeast, I got taught that the South wanted to have slaves and the North didn't. And we fought about it and we won. If you ask, my wife who grew up in Richmond, they would say that the North was being oppressive and evil and they happened to have won the war. So
they happen to have.
Right,
okay.
Yeah, exactly. But, it's odd because Richmond is kind of this melting pot, yet it's strictly speaking the capital of the South. It's the capital of the South of the Confederacy. And so it's a very interesting and odd place. And so Richmond is not a big city by any stretch of the imagination. I think the whole Richmond metro area is maybe 1 million people. And I know you said Slovenia is only 2 million, but
yeah.
By American standards, that's not very big. I mean, New York is, I don't know, the actual New York City is probably several million, if not 10 million. And the New York metro area is probably 10 or 20 million. Yeah. But Richmond is reasonably small by those standards.
Okay, nice. The sort of one comment. Yeah, okay. The South sort of one. That's, the North, I'm sorry. Yeah, well, I guess. Okay, so then I have to ask you about your hardware and software since this is sort of a tech show.
Sure.
So, I guess which computer and phone and tablet and stuff?
Sure. So I'm speaking to you on I believe it's a late 2011 MacBook Retina. Well, let me try that again. It is a late 2011 non-Retina MacBook Pro 15-inch with the high-res anti-glare display. So it was as close as you could get to a Retina before there was a Retina.
I was just about to say that. That was, That's...
and it's served me very well. It's got an SSD in it, and this is my work computer. Sitting to its left is basically its twin brother, which is my personal computer, except it doesn't have an SSD, and so it's pretty much unusable. And my phone is an iPhone 5S. I don't know how it is in Slovenia, but in America you get subsidized phones. So we pay $100 or $200, maybe $300 for a phone, and then you sign this 2-year contract. So basically, we get a loan from our wireless provider, and we pay it off throughout the contract. Is that how it works there?
Yeah, but the iPhone's usually the most expensive phone.
Same here.
Yeah, but we get subsidized phones. You can get like pretty great deals, but the iPhone's sort of special, I guess. So,
the same way it is here. And so the good news is that this year was a good year. So I have a 64 gig space gray iPhone 5S, which makes me extremely happy. And then come next year, when presumably the 6 comes out, it will be an off year for me because we do 2-year contracts, and I'll be miserable because I won't want to spend the money to, the almost $1,000 to get a off contract iPhone. And all my friends many of whom do, iOS development for a living, they'll all get them, Marco and underscore and so on. And I'll be very, very jealous. And then I just recently got myself a 32 gig space gray Retina iPad mini that's on the Verizon LTE network, and my phone is on AT&T. So between the two of them, hopefully something will have internet access if I need it.
Is it that bad?
No, it's not. I joke. AT&T, when the iPhone first came out, and even when I got my first iPhone, which was the 3GS, AT&T, when you were on like a major interstate, which is, our big highways, and when you were on an interstate or in a big city, AT&T was great. But if you got off the beaten path in any direction, AT&T was terrible. And at the time, Verizon had towers everywhere. And so with time, I would say it's actually mostly evened out. If you get somewhere really crazy, you're probably going to want Verizon. But anywhere that I usually travel, AT&T is usually just fine.
Oh, okay. I would have thought it was the other way around, that AT&T was everywhere and then Verizon sort of had to build it out. That was my impression, I guess. But
yeah, not anymore.
Oh, okay. Because over here we have like a national telecom, basically, that used to be, state-owned. Well, it still is. So it's a weird, complicated thing. They basically built out the network pretty well. And then we have a private telecom which I'm on, which is the same, in the cities is pretty great. And like as soon as there's no highways, you're pretty much screwed.
Right.
But it's getting better.
Yeah. And to be fair, AT&T, despite being called American Telephone and Telegraph, it actually is not state-owned, and to my knowledge, never ever was. In fact, it's very rare that you'll see a state-owned company in any capacity. The only thing I can think of is the Postal Service is this weird thing where it's a private company, but it has to answer to our governing bodies. And I think like the United States government pays for or subsidizes a lot of their work. And it's this weird kind of amalgam of sort of private, but sort of not. But accepting that, like we don't have a BBC or an ABC, I guess. We don't have a national telecom network or anything along those lines.
Well, yeah, you're Americans, that would be socialism, basically, which is what it was over here, so.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, and then the software, which is, I preface this question always with, the apps you actually use on your phone and your iPad. Like, not the stuff you have installed and is cool, but the stuff you actually use.
Right. So, I can't live without Tweetbot. I enjoy Twitter far too much. I never understood it for the longest time. I joined in, I think, late 2008. And at the time I thought Twitter was all about telling people when you poop, but as it turns out, it's actually really great for conversation. And so I can't live without Tweetbot. Reader, REEDER for RSS. Mm-hmm. I happen to use _David Smith's Feed Wrangler service to power Reader. I love also Pod Wrangler, which is _'s podcast app. 1Password. I actually have a beta of an app, and I think I'm allowed to say the name of it. And if not, we'll just have to pretend I never did. It's called GIF Wrapped, and it's by a friend of mine who does the Mobile Couch podcast. Who goes by Jelly, or his real name is Daniel Farrelly. And that's coming out very shortly. In fact, it might be out by the time that you release this show. And that's all for taking a folder in your Dropbox that holds all your animated GIFs and sharing them with friends, which sounds really stupid and lame, but it's for someone who really enjoys animated GIFs way too much. It's fantastic.
Awesome.
And so you'll have to look for that when it comes out. And Jelly, if I wasn't supposed to talk about it, I'm sorry. But I also love Instagram. I use Check the Weather for weather. I'm just looking at my very first page of my.
Oh yeah, I actually follow you on Instagram. The Christmas lights houses thing that was I'm not gonna even.
Yeah, that's a uniquely Richmond thing. So in case you're not aware, there in the town in which I live, in Richmond, it's 20 years ago, it started to be a thing where some families would put literally tens of thousands of lights on their house for Christmas. And, a few people did it, and then a few more people did it, and a few more people did it. And so now what happens is every Christmas, maybe 100 or 200 families in the area will put these tremendous amounts, sometimes 100,000 lights on their homes. So many that they usually have to get the electrical company to come out and give them like another line from the street in order to power all these lights. And some of them are synchronized with, a radio station that they're broadcasting out of the house. And it's really crazy. And so it's called the Tacky Lights Tour. Tacky being a, colloquialism for something that's kind of lame and silly. And so, what we'll do is, limo companies in the area will offer a Tacky Lights Tour where you get a bunch of your friends together and you get into a limousine and you bring usually a cooler full of, some sort of fun adult beverage, and you drink your way across Richmond as you're looking at all these lights. And so, a few friends and I did that, I guess it was 2 weekends ago, and I posted a couple pictures to Instagram, and maybe you can throw one in the show notes, but,
I'll put a link to
if I were to describe American excess in one picture, it would either be one of our ridiculous SUVs or one of these ridiculous houses.
I think the house is better, because that's just, throwing money out the window, basically.
Right. It is. It's ridiculous. Yeah. But, it's all kidding aside, it's a really beautiful, really wonderful thing to do to kind of bring you into the Christmas spirit. But I totally got you sidetracked, and I'm sorry. So the only other thing on my phone and iPad that I think I use a lot that I should mention is Evernote. I don't use it as much as some people, but I would certainly be somewhat lost without it. So I should bring that up as well. Oh, and I'm sorry, and Fantastical. Fantastical is also wonderful.
Okay, and then my last question, which is also always the same. If you had to mention one thing that sort of had an impact on your life, and it has to be a physical object, not like your grandmother's, what would that be? Like something that you might still have it, you might not have it anymore. What would that one thing be?
That's a really good question. And I have listened to at least one or two episodes of the show, and I should have paid attention at the very end to prepare my own answer. But I would say, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but the PC or IBM DOS, I think it was version like 3.3 or something like that, the manual for DOS 3.3 or whatever it was. And I say that because when I was very little, when I was, 10 years old or so, I couldn't tell you exactly, I would want to play a game on my dad's computer or whatever, and I would have to say to Dad, "Hey Dad, can you help me start," I don't even know what game it was, "can you help me start Wing Commander, or can you help me start Carmen Sandiego?" And he would say, "Oh, just, yes, all right, hold on." And not that my dad's a bad guy, but he was usually doing work on a different computer, or he was, busy when I would ask him this. And, whether or not you have kids, I presume you know how that is. And so eventually he said, "You know what? Just read the book, man. Why don't you just read the DOS book, and then you can figure this out for yourself." And again, my dad's a super nice guy. I'm not trying to paint him in a bad way, but after being pestered constantly for months, I would say the same thing. And so eventually I sat down and I read, as a 10-year-old or whatever I was, the DOS 3.3 or whatever manual. And I don't know if I understood very much of it at all, but I understood enough that it really got me to sort of use a computer, or to really use a computer rather than feel like the computer was this big, well, at that time, huge beige box that I didn't know how to operate. And that kind of changed my whole life, as silly and as cliche as that sounds. After that, it was a hop, skip, and a jump away from writing really crazy batch files in DOS in order to start games. I had like a whole menuing system that would, depending on what game you would run, it would or wouldn't install a mouse driver. It would or wouldn't install a CD-ROM driver, and so on and so forth. And then after that, we started playing with QBasic, and somehow or another I came up with a QBasic compiler so I could build executables on my own, which was wild. And around the time I met Marco, one of us, I might have been me, but I'm not sure, came up with a Visual Basic 1.0 compiler. And I remember vividly as kids that Marco and I would sit and write choose your own adventure games using Visual Basic 1. And so all of that, if you think about it, kind of comes back to me reading the book, me reading the DOS book.
Awesome. That was awesome. And I've never gotten that for an answer. So, even in the Slovene show. So that was a great thing. Casey, this is pretty much it. Thanks for doing this.
Hey,
honestly,
thank you. No, it's an honor. And it's wild to think that anyone anywhere in the world, let alone all the way over in Slovenia, would care at all what I have to say. So it's extremely humbling, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity. So thank you.
To je bila 54. epizoda Aparatusa. Caseyja najdete na Twitterju pod CASEYLISS. Accidental Tech Podcast je na internetu pod atp.fm. Poslušajte, če vas kakorkoli Apple ali računalniki zanimajo, gre za res zanimive debate treh modelov, ki vejo, kaj govorijo. Jaz sem na Twitterju @anzt, lahko mi težite tudi na mail anze@aparatus.si ali pa na Twitterju. Aparatus ima zdaj tudi Facebook stran, ki poišče v Facebooku aparatus.si, pa jo najdete. Sicer tako, kot vedno, hvala za poslušanje in pa, če imate šanso, lahko Aparatus od finančno podprete na aparatus.si/podpri. Evo, to do naslednjega tedna to. Čau.